Captain Willie has flown all kinds of planes and helicopters all over the world. His time in the cockpit started 45 years ago.
I was 21 years old when I went to Army Flight School, and that's in 1967. And that was 8 months of training, and then right after that there was on-the-job training in Vietnam.
On-the-job training while people were trying to kill him.
No matter what a gunship driver says, there's nothing that's much hairier than the lead ship when you come in to land, being sitting there about 50 feet from the tree line, hoping there's nobody in there that is aiming at you right then. But sitting there for about 30 seconds looking out the front window and hoping nobody's there is kind of hairy.
Upon his safe return to the U.S., Willie signed up to help fight forest fires in Arizona. Then the same company asked him to take a job on the other side of the world in Kathmandu, Nepal.
I had heard the name. I didn't know exactly where it was, but I knew it was someplace that I wanted to go. And it turned out to be the absolute answer to every dream I'd ever had as a child of travel and adventure growing up around Snow Hill. I got to land at Everest Base Camp behind Mount Everest a couple of times to pick up people from climbing expeditions that were suffering from altitude sickness. And I could not get over the fact that I'm going up this Khumbu Glacier up toward the base camp, that is little Willie Dyke from Snow Hill, Maryland, going right up here to Mount Everest to pick this guy up.
Willie flew people, supplies, and equipment all over Nepal. The whole country only had 3 roads at the time. Then in 1975, he returned home to the States and joined the Maryland State Police, spending time on the road and on medevac missions. But the thrill of adventure and spectacular scenery surfaced again. A couple of years later, Willie took a job in Alaska, flying for oil companies, the Forest Service, trappers, or salmon fishermen.
And you would stand in Nome Creek and have salmon bumping into your legs. There's so many that you could fill the back end of a pickup truck with a crab net in about 5 minutes. So the fact that it did change and the fact that the setting was so mind-blowing all the time made Alaska one of my favorite experiences and places to fly. Challenging flying, because you had to, not a lot of backup if you made a mistake. So you had to, it was good for map reading skills and fuel management and those kind of things.
It was in that part of the world that Willie had his greatest scare in the air while fighting a forest fire.
I just refueled and picked up a bucket of water out of the McKenzie River, 350 gallons of water. Came in over the fire at about 50 feet above the trees, and the engine quit. Lights and music in the panel, and I had punched off the water bucket and just had time to select my bunch of trees that I wanted to go into. Went into the trees, and I had just had time. It only started out from about 50 feet above the trees. I just had time to wonder if I was going to bleed to death or burn up. And the aircraft hit the ground level, and although I was sitting on a burning stump, there was no fire. And so I got out and worried about if there were any bears that were cruising the fire line that were going to eat me at that point. But 3 days later, I was back flying the same fire.
Willie eventually returned to the East Coast, spending a couple more years flying an air ambulance in North Carolina. Then, in 1986, he returned home to Delmarva and flew planes for NASA out of Wallops. After 16 years there, he joined WBOC and Chopper 16. He says after all of that, he has 2 favorite types of flying.
One is remote area flying. It's like I spent about 6 years in Alaska, and to see the world as it was laid out by the hand of God with no straight lines or square corners is something that's really good for you inside. And the other type is emergency medevac flying. The pilot has the ultimate responsibility for deciding where, when, and how you land. You pick your own approaches, you make all the decisions, and there's a lot of stick wiggling involved. And then every second or third flight, you're saving somebody's child. So there's no way you could beat that.
It has been a spectacular career spanning 45 years and more than 14,300 hours in the cockpit.
Lucky's not a good word for it because blessed comes a lot closer. Because of the way it unfolded, it suited me perfectly. I ended up going to all the places I ever dreamed of seeing, and it stretched me physically and mentally.